we're privately funded.
Everybody here? Good morning, everyone. We welcome Senator Carper's introduction and long-standing support of our bill to give the nearly 700,000 residents of the nation's capital voting representation in Congress and full self-government through statehood. The D.C. Statehood bill has passed the House twice, most recently in April 2021. The most recent polling shows 54%, now that's a majority, of Americans support statehood for the district. When the district's status as taxation without representation is noted in the poll, not 54%, but 58% of Americans support D.C. statehood, even 42% of Republicans. The single idea of taxation without representation that gave rise to the American Revolution still resonates today. D.C. residents pay the highest, note that, the highest taxes per capita and more federal taxes than 23 states. And the district has a bond rating higher than 35 states. For me, today is personal. For 3 generations, my family has yet to attain the rights other Americans take for granted. The D.C. Statehood bill has always been a personal acknowledgement for me in the name of Richard Holmes, my great-grandfather who escaped as a slave from a Virginia plantation. Richard Holmes made it as far as the District of Columbia, a walk to freedom, but not to equal citizenship. With Senator Carper's introduction of the bill in the Senate, along with support from Senator Van Hollen, Mayor Bowser, D.C. Council Chair Mendelson, and so many others, we dare to believe that statehood for the residents of the nation's capital is finally on the horizon. With that, I turn it over to the Senate sponsor of the D.C. Statehood bill, Senator Tom Carper. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I want to again applaud you for your steadfast support for doing what's right. I first stepped into this room, Chris, Mayor, President. I first stepped into this room 22 years ago this month. I was just elected as a U.S. Senator. I'd been governor of Delaware for 8 years before that, and congressman and treasurer before that, and naval flight officer for that. I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the U.S. Senate. And I wanted to be on this committee, in the Environment and Public Works Committee, because the issues are so important to our planet, and the issues are so important to our economy. For a long time, people didn't think we could ever get together our heads and our votes on comprehensive infrastructure legislation, but finally we did. People didn't think we could get our heads and hands together to produce bipartisan legislation that addresses climate change and make sure that in the face of that adversity of an ever-heating planet, we could actually create jobs and economic opportunity. But we did that too. And against all odds, I'm one who believes that some of the hardest things to do are the things most worth doing. And I'm delighted to be here today with my friends and our colleagues. So welcome. to our hearing room. I think this is a place that if the walls could talk, it would say a lot of good stuff that would encourage us today as we take up this battle again. Every day we work in the shadow of our capital, a beacon for democracy around the world, and yet an historic injustice still prevails. There are nearly 700,000 Americans who call the District of Columbia home, and they do not have a voting representative in either chamber of the Congress. These Americans are hardworking residents who pay the most in per capita federal income taxes in the country, but have no say in how those dollars are spent. Let me just say that again. These Americans here in the District of Columbia, the citizens of the District of Columbia, are hardworking residents who pay the most in per capita federal income taxes in the country, but they have no say in how these dollars are spent. These Americans here in the District of Columbia are law-abiding citizens who look after one another, but who have to wait for federal approval of local judges, sometimes for years, or help from the National Guard in times of crisis. These Americans are service members who risk their lives for our country, but who come home to find they are still denied a vote in Congress. As the last Vietnam veteran serving in the Senate, I take this next fact particularly to heart. Listen to this, more than 14,000 Washington, D.C. residents are currently serving in the military today, and can be sent into a battle and a war that about which they had no say in fighting. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. With Republicans now in charge of the House, our work to pass this bill has become even more challenging. But let me share with you, if I can, a quote that was said on the House floor in 2007. Here it goes. The fact that more than 500,000 Americans live in the District of Columbia and are denied a single voting representative in Congress is clearly an historic wrong. And justice demands that it be addressed. And the Speaker goes on to say, I believe that kindness demands that we do the right thing for all Americans, regardless of race or political creed. Those are the words of then Republican Congressman Mike Pence. He was right then, and he would be right today. At its core, this isn't truly a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an issue of basic fairness. When my friend and former colleague and mentor, Senator Joe Lieberman, first passed me the baton for D.C. statehood in 2013 as he was leaving, I knew we had justice on our side, and over the last few years, we've gained a fair amount of momentum, too. We will not give up today. Through the tireless work of Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, last Congress, the House passed their bill to grant Washington, D.C. statehood for the second time, not the first time, but for the second time ever. And here in the Senate, with the support of my friend Chris, we have built enormous support for our bill over the last few years. And we even have the support of a fellow who serves as President of the United States, Joe Biden. This Congress will continue making the case to my Republican colleagues that D.C. statehood is not a Republican or Democratic issue, but an issue of fairness and equality. I'm reminded of the tie that binds every major religion on this planet: Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism. These religions have their differences, but they all have one thing in common: the Golden Rule. Every one of them. You can find in their sacred scriptures the Golden Rule, the admonition for us to treat our neighbors as we would want to be treated. It's imperative that we live up to the core principles of our nation: no taxation without representation, and all men and women are created equal. I want to thank our mayor, Muriel Bowser. I want to thank City Council Chairman Phil Mendelson. I want to thank you for your continued leadership to push for equal rights and for equal representation for Washington, D.C. residents. I also want to thank my friend and colleague, Senator Chris Van Hollen from Washington's neighboring state of Maryland, for being here with us and for his leadership. I'll close with this. A British abolitionist named William Wilberforce once said these words a long time ago: You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know. These are the words of a man who led a fight against all odds for decades, in an effort to convince his colleague 150 years ago in Parliament in Great Britain that their country should oppose the injustice of the slave trade rather than be complicit in its continuance. I am confident that history will look favorably upon all of us who refuse to look the other way in the face of this injustice today. And with that, I'm pleased to present to you my friend and our colleague, Senator Chris von Hollen, from the great state of Maryland. The three of us, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia together, are Delmarva. Delmarva, he's my Delmarva buddy. All right, nice round of applause.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom Carper. Thank all of you for joining us today for this important occasion. And I do, at the outset, want to thank Tom Carper, whose birthday was yesterday. If we could all give him a big happy birthday round of applause. And he has been consistent. He has been consistent in terms of pursuing what is just and what is right. And I'm proud to be your partner in this effort. So thank you to Senator Tom Carper. My good friend, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, who I serve with on the House and who's been just steadfast in this effort. Thank you for all your efforts over many years, and congratulations on getting it passed out of the House 2 times, historic measures. And of course, to the Mayor Bowser, and to D.C. Council Chair Phil Mendelson, thank you both for your leadership on behalf of the people of the District of Columbia. We're here because it's simply wrong that the people of the District of Columbia don't have the same full political rights as every other citizen in the United States of America. We're here because it's wrong when you drive from my state of Maryland, that jurisdiction, and you cross the line into the District of Columbia, you go from a jurisdiction that has 2 voting senators and a voting member of the House of Representatives to a jurisdiction that does not have that representation in the Senate or the House. It's wrong because we are the world's oldest democracy, and yet the people who live in the capital of our democracy don't have the same political rights as everybody else in the country. That's wrong. And if you think back to January 6, 2021, that fateful day here on the Capitol, when our Capitol was under attack, when our democracy was under attack, the Capitol Police responded, but so did the Metropolitan Police. The Metropolitan Police put their lives on the line to protect this Capitol and to protect this democracy. And yet, the men and women of the Metropolitan Police who live in the District of Columbia were not able to vote for a member of the House or the members of the Senate that they were protecting as part of protecting our democracy. And that's shameful. Now, if you look at what's happening in the House right now, you have members of this very right-wing Republican majority who are actually talking about further dragging us backwards. The head of the House Oversight Committee has talked about even more micromanagement from the House of the people who live in the District of Columbia. I would suggest that these members of Congress should have their hands full dealing with their own congressional districts and other issues in the country rather than trying to dictate to the people of the District of Columbia and impose their will over the will of the mayor and members of the council who are elected by the people of the District of Columbia. And we will fight that effort, and we will prevent them from taking us backwards. But the only way to assure that we move forward on a permanent basis is to grant D.C. statehood, to make sure that those D.C. residents who go to war to defend the country, who pay those taxes, who defend the Capitol, that they have a full voting member in the House of Representatives and 2 voting senators as part of statehood. That is the goal. As Senator Carper said, things that are hard are worth doing when they're right, when you're right. Frederick Douglass, the great American abolitionist, orator, leader, born into slavery in the state of Maryland, said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." And the reason I have faith that we will absolutely prevail at the end of the day is, as Senator Carper said, we know that we are all on the right side. The right side of this is to assure fairness, to assure equality, to assure equal justice. And as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, and we will keep pulling and pushing until we make sure that the people of the District of Columbia have justice, and that means statehood. So we're going to keep the march going. We will prevail. We will prevail. And with that, let me introduce somebody who's been at the front of that march, along with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton and others, somebody who's there defending our democracy and our Capitol every day, as she also represents the people of the District of Columbia as the Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am delighted to be here to talk about who we are as Washingtonians, what we do for our city, and how we will continue our fight for statehood. I am delighted to be here with my Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, Senators Carper and Van Hollen, and the chairman of the D.C. Council, Phil Mendelson. I also would like to acknowledge Senator Strauss, our shadow senator. I wish we were here talking about how our bills have advanced through this Congress. We are grateful in the last several years that the House of Representatives has twice voted to advance D.C. statehood, and that Senator Carper continues to stand with us and advance the cause among his colleagues. We also acknowledge that over the last several years, the senator has gained more support in the Senate for the D.C. statehood bill than ever before. We also mark 50 years of limited home rule, and in the last several years, we have been reminded of how limited home rule can be. Not only with riders that continue to be on some of the legislation that comes through this Congress, but also with threats from the White House to take over the very police department that came to the rescue of this Capitol. So like my Congresswoman, and 700,000 Washingtonians, some born here and some who made D.C. their chosen home, this is personal. It's personal because we are Americans, just like everybody else. And we continue to be surprised that when we talk to our fellow Americans, they don't have a clear idea of who we are. That we pay taxes just like they do, that we pay our own way, that we pay more, in fact, per capita than any state in the union, that we bear all the responsibilities of statehood. But we have to endure on a daily basis the offense of looking at this building and knowing that we do not have votes in this building. Imagine that. In a country built on the premise that no one should be taxed without being represented, 700,000 Americans endure that every single day. We watched the great debates about protecting a woman's right to choose, to stopping horrific gun violence in our nation, to taking on the challenges of climate change, to picking Supreme Court justices without a vote. We've heard this debate described in the most basic terms. Where can my staff park? therefore you can't have a vote. Or we don't agree with your ability to regulate your own businesses or pay for the health care of your own citizens. So therefore, we will block your most basic rights as Americans. This is not a power grab. This is none of us saying we want more than our fair share. This is about democracy and about us achieving our full rights as American citizens. And so we will continue the fight. We will continue to find new partners and new allies where there were none until we achieve what is right, not just for us, not just for D.C. residents and our representation, but for the whole nation, that it is a more full democracy and more fully representative of the people who call the United States home. I know that I speak for us in D.C., and I am pleased now to introduce the chairman of the council, Phil Mendelson.
I'm actually the cleanup speaker, so I'm going to recognize our warrior on the Hill, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. That's not a good sign. Yeah. Sorry about that. Since I am the cleanup speaker, I'm not going to be that long. I want to start with this, and that is this past summer I had the privilege of visiting the United States Military Cemetery at Omaha Beach in Normandy, France. And I had the privilege of planting a flag at the gravesite of Anthony Salimi, Private First Class, 101st Airborne Division. He was a District of Columbia resident, gave his life that day. He was one of many district residents who gave their lives in World War II, and in World War I, and in Vietnam, and in many other war and military engagements of the United States. It is time to recognize that the citizens of the district are citizens of the United States, with all of the responsibilities of citizenship, but they do not have the full rights of U.S. citizens. Opponents give lots of arguments against statehood. At the last House Committee hearing, it was about the lack of car dealerships, if you can believe it. But opponents cannot overcome the basic principle that there should be no taxation without representation. In a democracy, there should be no government without participation of the governed. That's just fundamental. But D.C. is too liberal, too Democrat, and so this is a partisan issue, which is unfortunate. And because of this, what we have seen with this partisanship has hurt the District of Columbia. For example, 25% of our trial court and Court of Appeal judgeships are vacant because Congress can't confirm our judges. Approval of our laws is always delayed because all of them must come before Congress for either 30 days or 60 days, where nothing happens. And this year, we couldn't even transmit our bills to Congress for the first couple of weeks because of the paralysis in the House. We risk government shutdowns due to congressional fights over national issues such as the debt limit. We're powerless to call out our own National Guard when there's civil disorder, such as on January 6, 2021. And while Wall Street gives our fiscal management, the district government's fiscal management, high marks, Wall Street analysts continue to penalize us in its ratings because of the uncertainty of congressional influence. We can overcome all of this as district residents and U.S. citizens if we're treated as U.S. citizens, as the U.S. citizens of the 50 states, which is why statehood is the solution. Thank you.
We took up a lot of contentious issues in the last Congress. We did things that I was afraid we'd never accomplish. Bipartisan infrastructure, largest in the history of the country, transformational investments in climate change and creating all kinds of green jobs. toward the end of the day, we actually passed a budget plan and fund the government for the rest of the year. I mean, we did a lot. It was not for lack of interest in doing it. But this year, I think we'll have less on our plate, having dealt with the infrastructure in a very major way, having dealt with climate change in a major way. I think we'll have more room to take it up. Let me use this opportunity just for a minute. I mentioned earlier, I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the U.S. Senate. I was a P-3 aircraft naval flight officer and eventually a mission commander. We flew missions off of the coast of Vietnam and Cambodia during the Vietnam War, a lot of them about 500 feet off the water. We flew a lot of missions tracking Russian subs then and for many years after that. We had jobs in the airplane as air crew, but we'd also have jobs on the ground. And I always had jobs on the ground, like air intelligence officer, but always a P-3 aircraft mission commander. One day in an all-officers meeting, our commanding officer said to about 50 of us in the meeting, he said, overseas, and he said, I need a volunteer. And nobody raised their hand. And he said, I need a volunteer. Nobody raised their hand. And he said, I need somebody to, this was about 3 or 4 months before the election that year, even numbered year. He said, I need for somebody to be our voting officer for our squad. And we had 300 men at the time. We had no women in naval, almost none in naval aviation. That's changed dramatically. But he said, I need somebody to be the voting officer. I need somebody to get everybody registered to vote in their primaries, to get registered to vote in their general, and to vote. And who would be that volunteer? Nobody raised their hand. Finally, he said to me, he looked at me, and he said, Lieutenant Carper, how would you like to be that volunteer? I said, aye, Captain. And we registered almost every single person in our squadron. They voted in primaries, they voted in general elections. If they happened to be from Alabama or West Virginia or Wyoming or Texas, they got to vote in their primaries, presidential primary, they got to vote in the general. If they happened to be from the District of Columbia, they did not. We were serving in a war that was hugely unpopular. And most of us had the opportunity to be represented in the Senate and the House here by votes. The folks who were there in our squadron from the District of Columbia did not. That is not fair. Thank you. I think if you go back 15, 20 years ago, actually when it took the handoff from Joe Lieberman, people thought it was a fool's errand. We'll never do anything like this. We'll never provide the right to vote for folks from the District of Columbia. But you know, bit by bit, public opinion has changed. And I think that folks in this body, I think that if you ask them privately in secret, it's changed. And I think the key is just not to quit. And I don't know if there's going to be a vote in the committee or in the full Senate, but I know this: we're not going to give up. This is the right thing to do, and we're going to change this, however long it takes. People used to say of Wilberforce when he was in the Parliament in Great Britain, they thought he was on a fool's errand. You know, the Brits had supported slavery forever, and there's no way they were going to stop doing that. He never gave up. We're not going to give up. I don't know that I want to go down that path. All I know is this: folks here in this and who live in this district, they pay on a per capita basis more personal income tax, federal income taxes than anybody else. 13,000 of them are serving in uniform today. That's probably, in terms of on a per capita basis, about as high as anybody else. They need to be represented. They need an opportunity to vote. It's a premise that's simple. That's where we are, and that's where we're going to stay on that path, and that's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
We've mentioned several. You heard the chairman mention several, but let me talk about an element of the Home Rule Charter that not many people are aware of, and what it gives us while we elect a mayor and we elect a council. It reserved for the President of the United States the ability in an emergency to take over the Metropolitan Police Department. And we lived through a pretty tumultuous time where certainly nobody would expect the Metropolitan Police Department to report to the president. You heard the senator and Chairman Mendelson already mention something that no state endures, and that's the inability to call its own National Guard. The D.C. National Guard can only be deployed by the President of the United States. And once again, we lived through a tumultuous time where the actions of the President we couldn't really predict. And this Capitol itself was endangered, we believe, by the inability not only for the mayor to call the National Guard or to redeploy the National Guard according to the situation at hand. So those are a couple of examples. Well, our approach to the Congress and the White House, no matter who's in power, is to make sure that we let them know who we are, that we govern ourselves, and that we pay our own way. And we will be prepared to deal with any actions that are forthcoming.
What was that question again? Well, the council and the mayor really ought to speak on this code. As you know, every bill that the council passes has to come through the Congress, and there's been some disagreement, not much, but some disagreement on this new criminal code. Already we have seen some members of the House indicate that they will go after what the council and the mayor have just done on the new criminal code. That's an example of what they do.
Do you mind if I follow up? I just wanted to say that there will likely be differences between mayors and councils, and D.C. is no different. But any changes that we want to see in that legislation, we will handle with presenting them to the council.
And I'll just add that to echo to amplify what the mayor just said. You know, the legislative process, which doesn't include the chief executive, is one where there are going to be disagreements between the two branches. That happens in every state, and it happens in the District of Columbia. And that's the case here with the criminal code revision. One needs to look more deeply at what we did with the criminal code and the expertise that went behind it, and recognize as well that the district government has shown over 50 years that it's pretty good at governing itself and working out disagreements and resolving policy issues. And that's what is here and will continue to happen with regard to our criminal code. So there's no need for Congress to step in, and it would be wrong.
Sure. This is another example of why D.C. statehood is so important, because it's simply wrong to have members of Congress trying to veto, impose their will on the people of the District of Columbia against the wishes of their mayor and the council members. So, if Republicans in the House move forward to try to further erode the powers of the mayor and the council and overrule them, we obviously have an ability here in the Senate to push back on that, which is why I mentioned in my comments that we will fight hard to prevent any backsliding as we at the same time continue to move forward and keep the pressure on when it comes to statehood. So this is, again, the reason why we need to achieve statehood is because what happens often is we're in a position where Republicans can essentially threaten to shut down the entire government if riders that have been on for years do not remain. We will work to continue to remove the riders that limit the ability of the District of Columbia through their elected leaders to represent the people of the District of Columbia. We will continue to work hard to remove those riders. In all the legislation, all the proposals that I've advanced, for example, in my subcommittee and the Democrats have advanced on the full Appropriations Committee, we've eliminated those riders. But when you have some members of the House and Senate, Republicans, who are willing to shut down the entire government if they don't preserve a rider that continues year after year, obviously that illustrates the fundamental challenge we've got here, which is why we've got to keep pushing for the statehood bill. That was removed again on if you look at the House Appropriations Bill, the Democratic bill, as well as the Senate bill, Appropriations Bill, as written by the Democrats, that rider was removed because we think it's ridiculous that the Congress continues to meddle and interfere in that kind of decision for the people of the District of Columbia. Again, what happens is when you have Republicans who are willing to shut down the entire government, and that means in the Senate, obviously, you have to get 10 Republican senators, right? Yes, we had the votes in the House, but under our appropriations rules, we need 10 Republican senators to vote for any appropriations bill. And if they're willing to shut down the entire government over something like that, obviously it creates a real challenge. Again, that's why the long-term solution here is statehood. In the meantime, we are going to work with our colleagues. I will say, the new ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Committee here is Susan Collins from the state of Maine. In the past, I've talked to her about these issues, including that one. So maybe there'll be an opportunity, and we will fight again this year to remove those riders.
I don't have anything to report on RFK at this time.
Okay, is there a plan going forward?
I don't have anything to report on it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.